Okay, you ready, Mark?
I am ready. All right.
Any other questions about the classes? Did you get it now? Okay, thank you.
All right. So, what we want to do next is that we have our little thingy that we wrote here. So to save on disk space, some laptops include fingerprint readers. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to insert a footnote. Now, normally in an MLA paper, there are no footnotes. So normally in an MLA paper, all of the stuff that is usually done as a footnote is done as an inline parenthetical reference, like we did with Rossi here. In MLA, the only time that you put in a footnote is if you are going to talk about something that is sort of related to what you are writing about, but not totally related to what you're writing about, but is still pretty cool and you want to include it, but it's not really the main thrust of what you're writing about. That's when you put in a footnote. So apparently, you know, what's his name? What was the guy's name? Tory Bennett? No, it's not Tory Bennett. What was his name? Toby. What was his name? Teddy. So apparently Teddy Bailey, when he wrote this paper, thought that this was a really cool extra bit of information that he wanted to include in the paper. So to do this, in MLA, to put in a footnote, the way that you put in a footnote is you click onto references. So again, make sure that you're after the period in fingerprint readers. And then in references, you want to click on to insert footnote. You absolutely do not want to put in insert footer. Footnote and footer, totally different things. So this is a footnote that we want to put in. So we want to do insert footnote. And when we do insert footnote, it will bounce us down to the bottom. And down in here is, we want to put in the footnote. So in the footnote, this is on page 93. We want to say Nadir and White state that fingerprint readers can perform different functions for different fingers, and then a semicolon, and then for example, comma, one finger runs a program and another finger shuts down the computer. Now, for whatever reason, Teddy, when he wrote his paper, didn't have the book with him. And so for the moment, we want to insert a citation, but we don't want to insert the real citation because we don't actually have the book with us. So to insert a temporary citation, it's called a placeholder. And this is on page 93. So to insert a placeholder, we do references, insert citation. And then instead of add new source, because we don't have the book with us, we want to do add new placeholder. And the placeholder is just going to be Nadir. Click OK, and it'll have Nadir. And then we want to put in a period because we're at the end of the sentence. All right. Does anybody see anything wrong with this style of font and so on. What are MLA papers supposed to be written as? Right, this is Times New Roman size 10. It's supposed to be Times New Roman size 12. Is it double spaced? No. Is it indented 1/2 inch? No. So we need to change that. Now, the bad way of changing it would be to select it and change it. The better way to change it is to change the style. And because this is a special style, you want to right-click inside of here, or on a Mac, you can do a control click. And then you want to go up to style. And when you right-click and go to style, it says footnote text style. And in the footnote text style, we want to modify this. And we want to modify this to match our default style. So we want to change this from Times New Roman size 10 to Times New Roman size 12. And we want to change on format. We want to change the paragraph. And we want the paragraph to be double spaced and special indented by 1/2 inch. So again, this is on pages 94 and 95.
Can you go back and explain it again?
Yes. So then you click OK and click OK and click Apply, and it will then apply. So again, to change this, you want to right-click onto this area. When you right-click onto this area, you want to go down to Style. When you do Style, you then want to click on to Modify. And when you modify, you want to change the font to the correct font. And then on Format, go to Paragraph, and then change the spacing to double spacing, and change the special to first line 1/2 inch, which should seem very familiar to you because we've done this before. We did this with the main. And then you click OK. After you click OK, you click OK. And after you click OK, you click Apply. It should then look like this. All right, now that we've done that, we go home and we find the book, or we go to the library and we find the book. So now we want to change this temporary citation to the real citation. So to change it from a placeholder to a real thingy, we want to click onto it. And when we click onto it, we want to then click onto the drop-down menu. And when we click onto that drop-down menu, we want to go down to edit source. We want to choose edit source. And when we do edit source, it'll then bring up, and the type of source that we are doing is a book. And this is all on page 97. And in the book, there are 2 authors. So because there are 2 authors, you have a choice. Choice A is to type it out manually yourself. Choice B is to click on this edit button. And when you click onto this edit button, it allows you to add multiple names. So unless you are 100% sure that you are typing it in correctly, I would always recommend choosing edit. And the name that we are doing is, her name is Nadir. Her first name is Aisha. And her middle name is Sati. We click on to add, and then we want to add another guy. This one is Jonathan White. So we say Jonathan. So White is his last name. His first name is Jonathan, apparently with an O. My kid brother is with an A, so I always want to do A, but it's with an O. And then his middle name is Richard. So Richard. And then we click on add. So we have Nadir, Aisha, Sati, White, Jonathan, Richard. We click OK. And then you'll notice that where it says author, it now says Nadir, comma, Aisha, Sati, semicolon, White, comma, Jonathan, Richard, semicolon, which is how you would do it if you wanted to format it without doing the edit button. So again, this is all on page 97. Page 97. All right, page 98. On page 98, what we need to do is we need to put in the book, the title of the book. So the title of the book is Biometric Security. And the year is 2014. And the city is Chicago. And the publisher is the Windy City Press. And the medium is print. And after we do that, we want to click OK. And it should now say down at the bottom, it should say Nadir and White. Now, in MLA, if in your paragraph you say who the author is, then you do not, and in fact you should not, put the author's name in the citation. So you'll notice that in the paper it says Nadir and White state that blah, 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 blah. Nadir and White. So because we just said who the authors were, we're not supposed to put in the author's name as the citation. That's an MLA rule. So to change that, we want to click on to Nadir and White. We want to click onto the drop-down menu, and we want to edit the citation itself. And in the citation, we want to suppress the author's name. And if we suppress the author's name and click OK, it then says biometric security. But in MLA, you're not actually supposed to do that. In MLA, you're actually only supposed to put in the page number. So what we want to do is we want to suppress not only the author, but also the title. And when we suppress both the author and the title, we need to add in the page number that we are using. And the page number that we are using is pages 62 to 63. So 62-63. This is on page 99. And then we want to click OK. And now it'll change our citation to say 62 to 63. And the reason that we do this is because MLA, the whole point of the MLA style is to make it easier for the reader to be able to read the information without having to scroll down and look to see what the citation was all about. It's supposed to be that by reading it, you should just be able to intuit what the information is. So on here, when we say Nadir and White, it's pretty obvious that the author is Nadir and White, because in the paper, we said Nadir and White. So because we said that, we don't want to say that it came from Nadir and White, and instead we want to say what page numbers it was from. Now, really what we should do, even if we didn't say Nadir and White, so suppose the paper said, instead of saying Nadir and White state that fingerprint readers can do this, suppose it just said fingerprint readers can perform different functions for different fingers. It's supposed to have an S, different functions. Can perform different functions for different fingers. For example, one finger runs a program and another finger shuts down the computer. Well, that should say shuts down, not sewn. Shuts sewn. All right. Shuts down the computer. Well, if we had said just this, if we had just said fingerprint readers, then what we should do is not suppress the author and title and put in the page number. And what should happen then is that we should just put in, we should suppress just the title, which would then have Nadir and White 6263. That would be the full way of doing the citation if it were like this. But in this case, we actually said Nadir and White state that fingerprint readers. And so because of that, we want to edit our citation to suppress the author. That makes sense? And again, if you want an example of how this is the case, if you go to Pages and you go to Research Paper Resources and you go to the OWL website where they have the citations on here, there is a MLA formatting and style guide. And in that, they have examples on everything, including a MLA sample paper. And so if I look at an MLA sample paper, this is an MLA sample paper. So you'll notice it has your name, Professor so-and-so, the title of the class, the date of the paper. It has the title of the title. The paragraph is in here. And they are putting in the citations, they have, so right here, here is an example of a citation with a page number. So I'll say Dannhoff 5. That means Dannhoff wrote this, and the place where I found it was on page 5. So similarly, if we had said, instead of saying Nadir and White state, if we had just said fingerprint readers do this, then we would need to say Nadir and White space 62 to 63, because that's the page number where this was. That makes sense? So again, if you ever have to write an English paper or a research paper for history class or a research paper for any class, I would strongly advise you to go to the OWL website and check to see how it's really supposed to be formatted. Because, all right. What questions do people have at this point? Yeah. Okay, what are you stuck with?
How you change the names to the
So again, you click onto the drop-down menu and you click on Edit Citation. Okay, and then where it says Pages, we type in 62 to 63. And we say suppress the author and suppress the title. And then we click OK. And again, it's in your book on page 99. Page 99. All right, page 100. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to go back up to our actual document, and we want to put in a new paragraph. And in this new paragraph, this is on page 100 again, we want to say a face recognition system captures a live face image and compares it with a stored image to determine if the person is a legitimate user. Some buildings use face recognition systems to secure access to rooms. Law enforcement surveillance systems at airports use face recognition. Protect public. This is on page 101. You can skip the part at the bottom of page 100. We'll come back to that in a moment. Page 101, some mobile devices use face recognition systems to unlock the device. Face recognition systems are becoming more sophisticated and recognize people with or without glasses, hats, facial hair, makeup, or jewelry, and with new hairstyles. And then we want to cite where we got this information. But again, we've forgotten where we got it from. So we just want to put in a temporary citation. So to do a temporary citation again, we do insert, add new placeholder. We'll do insert, add new, insert citation, add new placeholder. And the placeholder is going to be Alan Smith.
Can you give us just a minute to finish
Mhm.
typing?
So on page 102, the book is telling you about showing and hiding white space. I strongly advise you to ignore everything that is on page 102. You should not ever hide your white space. What they're suggesting is, and do not do this, is that if you put your mouse in between the two pretend papers and double click, then it will make it so that it just quickly zooms down to the next page and stuff. If that's what you really want to do, there's a better way of doing that, and that's changing your view from being the page layout view to being the draft view. If you hide the if you do the hide white space, then it means you won't see any of the stuff that is in the headers or footers. And you might forget that they're there until you print it out and you'll be like, why is this here? I strongly advise you never to do show or hide white space. So although page 102 exists, I strongly advise you not to do it. That said, if you look up on the screen really quickly, I will show you what it does. Just don't do it. Do not do what I'm about to do, okay? Do not do what I'm about to do. If I put my mouse in between, you'll notice it changes to say double click to hide white space. If I double click, it hides the white space. Great. To bring it back, I double click and I can have it back. If you really want that, the better way of doing it is on view to go into draft mode, and then you can see your whole paper in draft mode. If that's really, really, really what you want to see is what you're writing. Change to draft mode in that case, because draft mode is useful for quick editing because the headers and footers and certain objects won't show up, allowing you to focus on your text. But almost never do I do that. Almost always I'm in page layout mode, which shows you what it will look like when it's printed. All right. Questions? Any problems? Okay. Next thing. So we went back to the book. Went back to the library. We found the website that we got this information from. So now we need to change Alan Smith from being a temporary citation to being a real citation. So again, to do that, we're going to click on to Alan Smith. We're going to click onto the drop-down menu. And when we click onto the drop-down menu, we're going to click on to edit source. And when we edit the source, this is a website. So we're going to scroll down to where it says website. And the author is, and this is on page 103, it is Alan Smith, comma, Samantha Claire. And the name of the webpage is Understanding Face Recognition Systems. And the if I click onto the all bibliography fields, the production company is Course Technology. And the year accessed was 2014. And the month was September, so SEPT dot, and 16th. And the the medium was web. So we click OK, and now it'll say Alan Smith again, but it will be a real one, and instead, as opposed to a temporary or placeholder citation. All right, we're on our last paragraph of our essay. So the last paragraph is home and occupational users alike are using biometric security through a biometric element, such as a fingerprint, devices can deny or grant access to programs, devices, computers, rooms, and other locations. Biometric devices are an effective security technology. All right, one of the things I wanted to point out to you is down at the bottom of your screen, you'll notice that it tells you how many words you've written. So I've written 291 words. You may have not written 291 words. It might be slightly off by that. That means either I made a typo or you made a typo or we both made a typo or something. But it should be approximately 291 words. If you click on that thingy that says 291 words, it will bring up what is called the word count. And in the word count, it tells you how many pages that you've written, how many words it is, how many characters without spaces, how many characters including spaces, how many paragraphs there are, how many lines there are. This can be really useful. Especially if you have a requirement like on a website where it says, please enter your text. The most you can do is 1,000 characters or whatever. This is one of the ways that you can make sure that what you're saying will match whatever those requirements are. So again, to get to the basic statistics, it's down here at the bottom where it says 291 words or however many words there are. You click onto that and it will tell you how many words that you have. Now, what if you wanted to know even more information? So the stuff that I just told you about is the thing that I told you to skip, which was on page 100. So going back, if you wanted to look at it, you could go back to page 100 and you have the screenshot showing you exactly what we just did. But it turns out that there's even more information that you can get. And to do this, you need to go on the File button and then go down to Options. And when you do File Options, there's a choice called Proofing. And inside of Proofing, there is a setting down towards the bottom that says when correcting spelling and grammar in Word, there's a choice down there that says Settings. And in the settings, there are all of the default settings that it's checking against grammar that you might want to either include or not include. So if you're noticing that your English teacher keeps saying that that you're having problems with your punctuation, or that you're having problems with your sentence length, or that you're having problems with the structure of your sentences, Word can help you with that by ticking off the various different choices that you might want to have. So I think that that is a useful thing that you can that can help you with that. And to do all of that type of stuff, that is going to be in your review tab. So if you click onto the review tab, you'll notice there is the word count. And again, word count, if I click on word count, it does the word count. It's the same thing as clicking on this button here. So word count can also be found by going on review and then doing word count. But next to word count is spelling and grammar. If you click on a spelling and grammar, it will tell you the number of words, the number of characters, and if you've asked it to do the grammar, it will come in with the grammar. Now, there's another choice that I have on here, and I want to show you why I have that. So if I go back into my options and I go into my proofing, there is a choice called Show Readability Statistics. Show Readability Statistics. And if you have Show Readability Statistics checked, then it means that when you do a spelling and grammar check, it will include the readability of your paper. And depending on what type of a paper it is, you might want it to be at a 12th grade level. I would argue if you're writing a college paper, 12th grade level is probably a good choice. If you are writing, say, a paper that you're expecting 3rd graders to read, this would probably not be a good choice. So why is that important? Let me show you what our adventure flyer says. So if I go back to the adventure flyer and I run a grammar check on the adventure flyer, so if I go into my review and I go into spelling and grammar, it says that in order to read this paper, you need to have a halfway through 9th grade reading level. The problem with that is that most people don't actually read flyers. Most people just scan through the flyers. And so the problem with the way that they've written this is that it's too wordy for it to really be an effective flyer. And so the point that I'm making is that anytime that you are writing anything, I think it's a good idea to run the readability test on it just to see where you're at. And ideally, you would want a flyer to be at like 3rd grade, maybe 4th grade, maybe 6th grade, but probably not much bigger than 6th grade reading level. That doesn't mean that you're writing it for 6th graders. It means that you know that most people, when they read a flyer, they're not actually reading the flyer, that they are just skimming the flyer. And if it's at a 6th grade level or lower, it means that they're going to be able to skim it and be able to read it quickly, which in a flyer, it's a good choice. In an academic paper, 6th grade level, not good. Nor would 9th grade level probably be good. For an academic paper, you probably want it to be at 12th grade level. On the other hand, you probably don't really want it to be at like 14th grade level, which is, because it'll go beyond 12th grade. Because then that implies that you need to have, an associate's degree in order to really read it. So again, how did I get to this? I don't want to save that. I got to that by doing File and then going down to Options. And then in my options, I went to Proofing. And in Proofing, I scrolled down to tick the box that says Show Readability Statistics. And then in Review, spelling and grammar. On the Mac, it's done the same way. The only difference is that on the Mac, you would, instead of doing File and then Options, you do Word and then Preferences. And then when you do Word Preferences, it's inside of Spelling and Grammar. And then you tick the box that says Show Readability Statistics. Same thing. I'm sorry?
I don't have the same thing.
Okay. We're almost done, so we'll come afterwards during lab time. All right. The last thing that we need to do on an MLA paper is that in an MLA paper, you are required to put in the bibliography, to put in all of the sources of all of the books and other types of things that you have done. And in MLA, this is not called bibliography. It is called works cited. So in order to do this, what we want to do is we want to, at the end of our paragraph, we want to hit enter so that we're on a new paragraph. And before we do that, we want to change our style so that it will no longer have the first line indented. And the reason we don't want the first line to be indented anymore is because in MLA, the works cited page is formatted differently than the rest of the document. Now, the good news is Word is going to help us do that. So you don't really need to know how to do it. You just need to know that it needs to be different. So in order to make it different, what we want to do is we want to go back to home and we want to reset our style back to the normal style. So if you click on to normal, it means go back to being normal at this point. And we want this to be on a new page because works cited or bibliographies and so on are always on a new page. Now, the absolutely wrong way of doing that is to press enter a whole bunch of times. Never, ever, ever, ever press enter a whole bunch of times. Instead, what you want to do is you want to insert a page break. And to insert a page break, you click on to insert, and then you choose page break. So insert and then page break.
What about using Control Enter?
Or you can do Control Enter. Control Enter is the keyboard shortcut. Control Enter is totally fine. But what you don't want to do is press enter like 70 times to get to the next page or whatever. And the reason you don't want to do that is because you might make changes to your document. And if you make changes to your document, well, it's no longer going to be 7 enters to get to the next page. It might be only 6 enters to get to the next page. And it'll then, your works cited will then be off. So the very first thing that you want to type in on here is going to be the words works cited. So we want to type in WORKS space cited, and then you want to press enter. And in order to insert a works cited page, the way that we insert a works cited is by going on references, going under bibliography, and you would think that you would choose works cited, and you would be wrong. And the reason you would be wrong is because Microsoft Office, for whatever reason, clearly did not communicate with the MLA people or with the Chicago Tribune for the bibliography people, or I don't understand why they did it this way. Because you absolutely do not want to use any of the built-in bibliographies, and instead you want to choose insert bibliography. The worst news is that if you are on a Mac, you do not have the option to choose insert bibliography. You must choose insert, click on a bibliography and then click on a works cited. But you then have to go back and reformat the works cited part of it, because the works cited part of it is not going to be formatted correctly. Because everything needs to be Times New Roman, size 12, double spaced. And just to show you what it does, do not do this, but you'll notice this is not the correct format. Works cited is blue and not not formatted correctly. So you don't want to do that. And instead what you want to do is choose bibliography and then choose insert bibliography. And then it will write it correctly. The last thing that you want to do on this is you want to go to where it says works cited and you want to make it centered. Because works cited should be centered. Remember how I said before that sometimes you want to have the second line indented? That's works cited. The works cited page wants all second and third and fourth and so on lines indented by 1/2 inch. And so that's what it automatically does. All right. So at this point, I'm going to save my document. I'm almost ready to publish it and turn it in, but I realized in proofreading it that I made a couple of mistakes. So on page 9, we need to change our source, because the title of the Rossi paper was not understanding how to use fingerprint readers. It was just how to use fingerprint readers. Now, the wrong way to fix this would be to go into here and fixing it. Don't do that. Instead, what you want to do is you want to go to references. When you go to references, you want to go to manage sources. And when you do references, manage sources, it will show you on the right-hand side all of your current sources. So the source that we want to edit is Rossi. So I want to click on Rossi, and then I want to click on to edit. And when I click on a Rossi and I click on to edit, I then want to change the title from saying understanding to just saying how to use fingerprint readers. And again, this is all on page 109. Then I want to click OK. And it'll say, are you sure you really want to do this and update everything? And I want to say, you betcha. And then I want to close. And you will notice the drastic change that this made. Was there any change? No, because Word is stupid. Word does not recognize that you've made any changes. Computers only know to change something if you actually tell them that there's been a change. Now, one of the ways that you could figure out that there was a change is you could save it, and then you could close it, and then reopen it, and the change would be made. But there's a better way of doing that, and this is on page 110, and that is to put your mouse anywhere inside of any field. So anything that is automatically being generated. So any place inside of this works cited part is all stuff that's being automatically generated. So if I right click anywhere inside of here, there's a choice that says update field. And if I choose update field, boom, it made the change. Why do you have to do this? Because Word's stupid. Computers are dumb. They don't know anything. They do exactly what you tell them to do and only what you tell them to do. You didn't tell it to update the field. Why doesn't it automatically update the field? Because the computer programmers who wrote Microsoft Word did not make it automatically do that. Better question is, why didn't they do that? That I cannot tell you, but I know what happened. All right. There is a couple of other changes they want us to make. Page 112. Page 112, they decide that the sentence reads better with the word biometric inserted before the word devices. Now, they're suggesting that you should copy and paste it. I'm suggesting you should just type it in. So to do that, we're going to go back to where it says home and occupational users, such as a fingerprint, comma, and then it should say biometric. They think that reads better, so sure. The next thing is that they think that the word identifier should be changed to, or the word element should be changed to identifier. Is that what it was? Yeah, they think that the word element should be changed to identifier. So there are a couple of ways that you could do this. The way that the book is suggesting, and it's not a bad way of doing it, would be to do on home to do a search. So I click on to find to bring up the search. And then if I look for the word element, it finds two different instances of the word element. And if I click onto the drop-down menu under it, I can then choose replace. And when I do replace, it will say replace element with, and they think it should become identifier. And then if I want to change all of them, I would click on to replace all. If I just want to replace this one, I would click on to replace. If I want to skip this one, but go to the next one, I would click on find next. So they're suggesting that we should replace all of them. So we'll do replace all, and that will then replace all of them. No, but I'll come back and show you how to do it after class. So again, the stuff that we just did was on page 114 and 115. Last thing that we want to do, the very last thing that we want to do is that we want to change the word occupational. So they've decided that the word occupational, so where it says home and occupational users alike are using biometric security, they're suggesting that occupational is not the best choice because it's kind of a hard word to read, and that maybe we should look up and see if there aren't better words that could be used. So if we go to occupational and right click on occupational, there is a choice called synonyms. And inside of synonyms, they have a bunch of thesaurus words that there's a built-in thesaurus in Word. So you can use the thesaurus to help you come up with a better word. And so we could do work-related or job-related or professional, but they're suggesting business. So if we change this to business, it then changes the sentence to say, home and business users alike are using biometric security. So again, this is on page 116. And again, one thing you should always do is you should always run the spelling and grammar check one last time to double check that everything is spelled correctly. And if you want to, you can then read what your reading level is at and see if it's at an appropriate level. And at this point, then, we are all done. So to save this, I'm just going to do a save. So again, I could click on my save button, or I could do file and then go down to save, not save as. Save as saves a copy of what you are doing. So if you wanted to have multiple versions of your document, that would be why you might want to do a save as. Or if you wanted to save this paper for me, and then you wanted to save an exact copy of this paper for Professor Jones, then you could do a save as and change it to Jones. Although if Professor Jones and Professor Branham were to talk to each other, you might get in trouble for doing plagiarism and copying, plagiarizing your own work, type of stuff, unless the teachers explicitly say it's okay to reuse it. By the way, your teacher in this class explicitly says it is okay for you to reuse other work for for your own stuff. So on the assignment where we're making our own flyer, if you needed to make a flyer for a class, you absolutely can use that. If later on you need to create a PowerPoint for another class, absolutely you can use that. But check with your teacher, make sure it's an appropriate and okay thing to do. All right, so now that I've saved my awesome paper, I'm gonna quit out of Word, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to go to assignments. And I am going to go into Word Chapter 2, Part 1. And in Word Chapter 2, Part 1, creating research papers, I am going to submit my access granted paper. Click on to submit. And now I have completed the first part of our assignments for this week. So again, your homework is, if you haven't finished chapter the thing that we just did, make sure you finish what we just did. And then chapter 2, part 2, is to create another research paper. And this research paper is the mobile device protection research paper, which is on page 1. The paper itself really starts on page 132 to 133, but way down at the bottom on page 131, it talks about some preparing works and stuff. So it's important to read that as well. But the main paper is on pages 132 to 133. All right, we've come to the end of the stuff that I wanted to talk about tonight. What we will be doing next week is we're going to create a business letter, and we're going to create letterhead, and we're going to manipulate some pictures and that kind of fun and exciting stuff. So what I'm going to do for the remaining 40 minutes that we have is I'm going to stick around, help anybody that needs any individual help, and otherwise have a wonderful rest of the week, and we will see you next time.